And welcome to another edition of Odyssey House Journals. I'm Trip Mitchell, joined by my co-host and great booker, Randall Carlisle.
I'm such a great booker. I've booked the most important person we've ever had on this podcast so far.
And frankly, we're here with U.S. Attorney John Huber, but you're also the first guest in a suit.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
Well, he has to go about his everyday job as well after he does this podcast.
I wear this to sleep at night.
Well, it's important to be in a suit and ready to go. But the show is about addiction here in the state of Utah, but more importantly about meeting people who've done an amazing job of recovering, getting on with their lives, and getting moving forward. And we are so excited. Randall, you were nice enough to bring the numbers in, but we're on a high show. We're averaging 12,000 listeners a week, which is incredible for a podcast.
And viewers.
And viewers as well.
And something you don't know, John, is that we actually have people listening to this in Russia.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
We have several foreign. Why they're listening in Russia?
I'll have to find out.
I said, if somebody comes from Russia and comes to visit, I'll buy them a bottle of vodka and take them to lunch. But
if
nobody's taken me up on it yet. So.
Well, there was a guy kind of confused out in the alley behind the studio.
He said, I want a bottle of vodka. I said, no, you're not from Russia. So.
But one of the things that we're excited on, and we're past 40 shows, is this is an opportunity for those of you at home. If you've got some questions, if you have a loved one, if you've got someone you know at work, or yourself who feels like addiction is catching up with you, both Randall and I are members of the AA community, and getting that chance to have people help us has made an amazing change in my life. And on a personal note, I got a message this morning about a gentleman who took me to my first AA meeting 14 years ago is having his plug pulled today. Went back out, had some alcohol issues, was taken into the hospital, and is going to pass away today.
Wow.
So that is the scary part about this disease, and it happens in both drugs and alcohol. And the good news is there are thousands of people here in the state of Utah who are trying to help. And we're going to give a phone number out for Odyssey House in just a second, and that's a number to call. And Randall has been a long-time newsman in this market, but had an opportunity to go work for Odyssey House and contribute back. And you're so much happier. You haven't worked a day since.
No, I haven't worked a day since, and it's so different. And, I've said this before in TV, and John can probably second the emotion, is that we don't always do positive things in television, right? Television news, we try sometimes, but at Odyssey House, I feel like we're making a difference in the world with a lot of people. We treated over 7,000 or 8,000 clients last year, and not all of them succeed, but I feel like I'm making a difference. More importantly than what TV news does. So not to belittle TV news, okay? But
well, my experience, Odyssey House, I've been a prosecutor for 25 years, and in my very first years as a prosecutor, it came to my attention the role the Odyssey House plays in our community, and the great service that they offer, and just the quality program that they have.
The judicial and prosecutorial system seems to look upon Odyssey House rather favorably when it comes to clients who are appearing in court and things like that. How did when you were a prosecutor in West Valley?
Yeah, well, I started up in Weber County,
right,
and then quickly moved down to West Valley, and that's really where I became aware of Odyssey House, because they're so strong here in Salt Lake County. But the judges spoke favorably of them. I wanted to learn more and learned about how demanding the program is. And like you mentioned, it's a difficult program to succeed in. But if you do, you're well on your way to a much better life.
Absolutely. And now you're in charge of enforcing federal laws in all of Utah, which is a pretty big job. Describe what all your office does.
Oh, yeah, that's fun for me to talk about. It is quite an opportunity to be appointed by two presidents now to serve.
Democrat, Republican.
That's right. I'm the only one in the country to have that privilege.
Really?
Yeah. One of 94 current U.S. attorneys. I'm the only one who was appointed by President Obama and then reappointed by President Trump. So I feel very lucky. But the types of things we do, they run the gambit. National security is high on our list, and so we're working hard to keep our nation safe from terrorists and spies, espionage. We had big cases last year with a Utah being paid by Chinese to give them our military secrets. So that really happens. You go down the list, violent crime is a big priority for us, and when I talk about violent crime, I'm talking about gun crime, robberies, drug traffickers, criminal alien offenses. And then, another big priority in Utah are the fraud schemes. Utah is known for white collar fraud, and we have an outsized amount of that. So that's another big priority. And also, we protect the taxpayer money. We try to prevent fraud and hold people accountable for defrauding the United States and protecting our resources too. So there's a lot of different projects to work on. And in the middle of all those, though, is our violent crime problem, which the backstory to so much of our violent crime is drug trafficking. And then, of course, we know that those who find themselves on the wrong side of the law, the backstory there, so many times, I've heard 65%, as much as 80% of those stories have alcohol and drug abuse in the backstory.
Let's take it down to a smaller level. And you do all this, by the way, he's a one-man office and he does all that himself, right?
Right.
It's amazing. Superman.
We have 130 some odd employees, close to 60 prosecutors. So it's a big operation.
We have a lot of people watching who have loved ones who are dealing with addiction of one kind or another. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons we wanted to get you on is to talk about what I sense is a different kind of approach to low-level drug users who are dealing with addiction, as opposed to just say, throw them in jail, throw away the key. You're taking a rather more humane approach.
Well, yeah, I'm not the only one. I mean, this is a trend in law enforcement that is in our state courts. It's in the federal courts. And it's been around for a while, but I think in the federal court in Utah, it's a newer prospect. We take a view that, and here's the question we ask: but for this addiction, well, who would this person be? And if we can take that addiction away, they would be a productive member of a society, then they're probably worth the investment. And that you can do that analysis on a lot of people.
Sure.
But you have to measure that against the offense that they committed that they are in the court for. And there's a certain amount of justice that needs to be meted out, but we remember that these are individuals and we're all humans, and we want to help each other out.
Well, and addiction is, in the state of Utah, we're kind of surprised by the amount of drug addiction there is here. You would perceive Utah as being a majority LDS state, so there's not as much drinking as there would be in other places, but people are finding themselves on drugs through no fault of their own. And a lot of this has to do with painkillers, and we've met so many people who have been injured, had their first bout of any drugs, painkillers, and then all of a sudden they get addicted and things go badly. Can you address that a little bit and how that's changed here in the state of Utah?
Oh, absolutely. That is a common story, that someone who didn't decide to be a heroin addict one morning,
Things to do today.
There are different paths to that end, right? There are people who start with alcohol or marijuana and eventually find themselves involved in very serious killer drugs. But the segment of society, and it's a real segment, and there's quite a number of people in Utah and elsewhere in the country who they slip and fall, they hurt their knee, playing sports or whatever, and go in, and because of their physiology or because of simply the prescription that the doctor gave them, take 2 pills a day, for a long time. And before you know it, they find that their body has become addicted to this. And then you see that, they'll go back and want more refills. When that doctor says no, they'll go to another doctor and complain of pain. And then just run that scam for as long as they can to get what they need to feed their addiction. Then, when that shuts down and there's no more doctors who are willing to write a prescription note, then they will resort to the cheaper, dirtier cousin of pain pills, and that's street heroin. And that happens a lot in Utah.
And one of the things that your office has taken a big step forward is the fentanyl, and how that has become the drug that takes things to the next level. It's so powerful and so deadly. But you've made a real point of getting after those people.
Oh, absolutely. This is such a frightening substance. Because when you think about how dangerous it could be to look at someone who's injecting heroin into their body, now compound that exponentially, the danger when we inject or take in fentanyl. Because, 2 grains of salt worth of fentanyl can kill someone by ingesting it.
It's pretty amazing. And it's being mixed with everything now, including like pot and
And
meth. And,
Oh yeah, it's crazy what it's being mixed with.
but people are doing it, dealers are doing it because it gives it more of a kick. Is that?
Oh yeah, kick. I mean, a kick is going to kick you into death.
Kick into the
That's
grave.
quite a kick, and it's so cheap. The profit margin on fentanyl is what drives the drug dealers into the business. So I can spend $3,500 to get a block of fentanyl this big. $3,500. I can cut that literally into 1 million doses that are then sold. If you put it into a pill form, a fake OxyContin pill, which is $30 per pill, and there's 2 grains of this block in that, you can see how the profits get huge.
Where is fentanyl manufactured?
Well, today,
China.
China is where most of it has come from. And so the biggest case that we've done in Utah with fentanyl, that came mail order from China through shipping and mail. The scary thing now, and this is what we predicted a number of years ago, is that when the cartels and their very organized, almost corporate business model in Mexico, when they see the profit margin on fentanyl, they're going to get in the business. And that's what we're starting to see, is that they're starting to manufacture it in Mexico and ship it into the United States from Mexico. So it's larger scale of what we've seen in Utah on 2 young people in a basement in Cottonwood Heights and the damage that they did.
And that was the pill guy.
Yeah, that's the Shamo case, the pill case, the fake pain pill case. And I'd love to spend time talking about that. But now you take that, 2 young, 20-somethings who dropped out of eBay to get into drug trafficking. Now you say corporate-style cartel is in this business. This is very frightening for the United States.
35. I'm terrible at math, but $3,500 for
A million
a
hits.
thing of fentanyl, and then you multiply it, so it's tens of millions of dollars for a $3,500 investment.
Yeah, the profits are irresistible
Yeah.
for some people.
And we're seeing OxyContin now, the manufacturers, a number of states, and not on the federal level, but state attorney generals, are reaching a settlement with the family that designed that because it was supposed to not be addictive, and it's proved to be very addictive.
Oh yeah, and I'm not involved in that lawsuit, so I can't really speak to that. But I have studied the issue, and if you want to look really deeper, and this is really what interests me, is this addiction crisis in the United States. And so, we've called it the opioid crisis, we've called it methamphetamine. It doesn't really matter the substance. We have an addiction problem in the United States. What is it? The greatest nation that the world has ever known, probably ever will know, and yet this is an Achilles heel that we have in our society. What drives us to addiction? Why do we, we have, less than 5% of the world's population, and yet we consume 98, 99% of the world's hydrocodone? Why is that? That's a very deep, complicated issue that we've really got to get our hands around.
Right.
Those numbers are static. Repeat those numbers one more time.
Oh yeah, now I'm going from memory, so I mean I'm doing my best here.
He's right. I remember reporting.
But
that
we have a lot of people in the United States, big country, lots of people. But if you compare that to the world's population, it's almost a drop in the bucket. We're less than 5% of the world's population, or thereabouts. I don't know. I can't nail it down that closely. But we consume 98, 99% of the world's hydrocodone, which is, a man-made opioid.
So in Europe, my understanding is that if you go in for even elective surgery, they won't give you pain pills. They'll give you over-the-counter
in some countries.
in some countries. So have we gotten to the point where we are over-medicating ourselves?
Well, I've read those observations by critics, and they seem compelling, that we've become a pain-intolerant society. We go to the hospital, what's your pain on a scale of
And you
0
always
0 to 10?
exaggerate a little bit.
Well, I don't know. Maybe you don't. Maybe you minimize depending on your personality. But it's all about no pain. We want you to have 0 pain. Whereas our parents and grandparents maybe didn't grow up that way, where they weren't looking for a pain pill when they fell off the tractor in the field or whatever. They just grinned and bared it. And for some reason in medicine we have become pain intolerant. I have to be a 0 on the pain scale, and so we're going to give you drugs to get you there.
And one of the aspects of that is because they want good reports when they'll send you a follow-up email and say, how were you taken care of in our emergency room or wherever, and they want to have a good report. And the happiest reports come from people who get the zero pain when they walk out of the doctor's office or the hospital.
So I had my knee replaced in June, and they gave out a very small amount of pain pills, and you had to go back. And I thought about it because I've got alcohol and stop
Sure.
early in the cycle because you didn't want to be in that situation. But pain is funny. It when I was an athlete, I remember going in to have my ankle done, and the gentleman in the next bed over was a Detroit Lions player, and he told me, complain about pain before it comes. That way they'll keep you medicated.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But what you just said, John, is interesting, that we do have a perspective that we never want to feel pain.
I did a in-depth report when I was working on TV with Brian Besser, the head of the DEA here, and he gave me the idea for the title, and it was A Pill for Every Ill. And his claim was the fact that we grow up from being little kids. Oh, you've got a headache or a fever? Let me give you a pill for this, or let me give you some Benadryl so you sleep. And that we grow up thinking that there's a pill for every ill, and then that multiplies itself into what we have today. And that was his thinking. I want to get into talk about a federal diversion programs, because we have so many of them now, and at the federal level there hasn't been too much publicity. We have, and Salt Lake County has drug courts. There are drug courts all over America, and they seem to be working. And the idea, I guess, is to, as opposed to necessarily throwing somebody in jail, giving them a chance to seek treatment and avoiding jail, if depending on the crime they've committed. Can you talk about because we had one person on here who got tremendous viewing, and I love her. She was facing 10 years in federal prison on delivery of meth charges, and she's in one of your diversion programs now and blossoming. Describe how the programs work.
Yeah, well, this one you're talking about, this particular one, because we have a number of different efforts in the federal court. But this one we call the Utah Alternatives to Confinement Track.
UACT.
UACT.
Okay.
So the acronym denotes some personal accountability and some power to take control of your life. And that's what we want these people to do. And this is a program that I designed.
Really?
This is one that I proposed to the federal court. I had studied a similar program in California, in LA, that had seen some pretty good success with this. And then I envisioned how we might be able to apply that here. I asked for the judge's permission to start it, and then we got it going. So we're about 3+ years into this experience now, and it's very small scale, Randall. So
she said she was one of a select few.
Yeah,
to
we're
get into
no
this
more than
program.
a dozen people at a time, and so these are people who do not have extensive criminal histories, and so that don't have what we view as a high risk of danger to the community. And then go back to that analysis I mentioned earlier. But for this addiction, or but for this whatever problem it may be, if we could help them with that, remove that from their lives or get control of it, they're going to be, like you said, a blossoming positive individual. Yeah. And we've had some success. There's a lot of resources that go into this. So this is an expensive program.
How's it work? I mean, for the person watching or listening to this, some people would say throw them in jail, and others would say help them, don't do any jail time. How's it work?
Well, they have to agree to enter into this program. They have to want it and qualify under those criteria, and then we'll give them a chance. There's actually 2 tracks, depending on the offense or their history. They can actually earn a complete dismissal of the federal prosecution. I mean, how often does that happen?
Very rarely.
Or they can earn a probation sentence and avoid federal prison, but still have a conviction on their record. And it's a rigorous program. It's a weekly program. And then there's a field of professionals, treatment providers, problem solvers, life skill people. District judge meets with them every week.
Wow.
And
they do UAs all the time, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. And they do assignments and projects and reporting, and they're congratulated on their successes. And, for some of these individuals, this may be a very rare circumstance that they accomplish something.
Right.
And
Good
they get
job.
a pat on the
Attaboy.
back, and they feel like they're on their way to accomplishing things. Getting a job, finding an apartment, staying off drugs for a time or alcohol for a time. And we realize that there will be relapse. We realize that there will be trips and stumbles along the way on this path to recovery. This group will support them and give them some second and third chances. Eventually, though, I mean, they've really got to turn the corner. And the candidate that you mentioned, we're really proud of her and a few others. My hope is that we can learn from this pilot project, with a dozen people at a time, and apply some of these principles on a larger scale to more people. That will be the challenge, because this, like I said, is expensive in the investment of resources for an individual. How do we replicate that without overburdening our system?
How do you scale it up?
Yeah,
That's the
and
question.
you've got a ton of people working on one person.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
But on the other hand, when you invent a new drug, you have a lot of research that goes into it, and you find out if it works, and then you scale it up. And this is an incredible program, because again, this was our first guest, and to see someone who facing 11 years in prison, but yet she went out and got sober before she went, fully thinking that she was going to spend 11 years. And in the federal system, you don't get parole.
You get your prison sentence and you serve it.
Exactly. And this is an amazing program. We're going to take a short break, but first we're going to give out the number for Odyssey House, which is
801-322-3222.
And if you get a chance and if you have any questions, call that number. There, as I mentioned, thousands of people in the state of Utah out there to help. Odyssey House is a great program, though very strenuous and rigorous. There are programs for everyone out there, but call. They can answer your questions. We'll be back. We're visiting with U.S. Attorney John Huber. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Odyssey House Journals. That's Randall Carlisle. I'm Trip Mitchell, our guest, U.S. Attorney John Huber. And we learned today the only U.S. Attorney appointed by
President Obama,
Eric Holder, and
President
reappointed Trump.
Yeah.
You were the guy in the middle. How's that feel?
It feels great.
I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, with the political happenings of today and both sides being so diametrically opposed, for you to make it through, how'd you do that?
Luck.
Or maybe you're just good.
Well, I don't know. I'll accept that compliment. Thank you. One of the privileges of having served in 2 administrations and then also be a close advisor to now 3 attorneys general of different parties, I've seen behind the curtain in both administrations.
Yeah.
And people ask me, well, what would you tell people what you learned? I tell them, chill out, because despite the divisiveness that we see on TV and is pushed on us by the television, they're good, honorable people serving in both administrations. And I'd say the conversations I had in the Obama administration under Attorney General Loretta Lynch, conversations I had in the Trump administration with Attorneys General Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr, let me just pick a number, 87.9% exactly the same.
Really?
Right? Because we agree on so much as Americans. Who likes drug traffickers? Raise your hand. Who likes spies and terrorists and violent criminals? Raise your hand. No, none of us like that, and we want to solve those problems. And so that's why I say the conversations were, almost to a T, the very same conversations.
A Gwiz question here from just a person on the street. Do you have a personal relationship? Did you with President Obama or President Trump? I mean, can you call up and say,
No.
"Hi, this is John Huber in
No,
Utah"?
no. I met both of them multiple times, and it was a great honor to meet each of them and to shake their hand. But no, the U.S. Attorney in Utah doesn't have that type of relationship. My boss is the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General of the United States.
So when it comes to law enforcement, can you tell our viewers the difference between a state prosecution and a federal prosecution? How is that delineated?
Most of our law enforcement is by design of the Constitution put on the states and their divisions. So the 10th Amendment to the Constitution says the states have responsibility for enforcing laws in their areas, in their states. Federal law enforcement is very limited. So like 15% of all law enforcement is federal. And so we have limited resources. It's not our primary responsibility to keep the streets safe. What we do is try to pick problems and exercise jurisdiction in areas where the state needs a little bit of help. And
because the resources, my understanding, if the U.S. Attorney's Office gets involved, you have a lot more resources, be it FBI, DEA, people like that.
Well, a lot more of a certain type of resources. So let's take drug trafficking, since that's kind of related to what we're talking about today. Our state court prosecutors and the police departments and sheriff's offices are inundated with cases. And they'll be very interested in who that dealer is on the street corner that's distributing this poison, this fentanyl, this methamphetamine, this heroin, whatever it may be. And they want to get that person and take them to court and get some justice for that person. What I am more interested in is, how did that guy get those drugs on the corner? Who supplied him? And more importantly, who supplied his supplier? And that's where the federal resources come into play, that we want to track back the fentanyl to China, the methamphetamine to Mexico. Find out who those organizations are and try to dismantle organizations rather than the immediate crime that occurs on the streets.
Do you think that, and you had mentioned earlier, the fact that we have such demand for drugs, and that's not something that you're going to solve overnight, but
I wish he could.
we found that even in a state like Utah, the demand is equal to any other state. So we're not unique in that. In Utah, there are no problems. We're very similar.
Right. We can't have a
Pollyannish,
view, Pollyannish, or that we're in some kind of mountain sanctuary and the mountains protect us. No, we are susceptible to these challenges as anywhere else, as West Virginia, Ohio, those kind of places that are devastated by the opioid crisis. We have the same dynamics here in Utah.
And we see a lot of, because of our geographic location with freeways going here, there, and everywhere throughout the country, we see a lot of major drug busts here.
Oh, absolutely. So besides the drugs that land here in Utah by design, and there's truckloads of those, because of the interstates, I-80, I-70, I-15, we get a lot of courier cases, people who are delivering drugs on behalf of big organizations, and they crisscross our state. A lot of our methamphetamine goes up and to points east. But what's troubling recently is with the legalized marijuana states on the West Coast, they become havens for organized crime to take advantage of the camouflage of legality, and they're overproducing and black market marijuana that is in high demand in the east. And so we'll see cars and truckloads of marijuana going east through Utah, and then money coming back west to pay for it.
Wow.
And our highway patrol is put at risk to have to make those stops
Sure.
and intervene in those transits. And that's a newer dynamic that has started with the legalization issue on the West Coast.
Where do you see legalization going eventually? Now, Canada just legalized pot for the whole country.
Federally, yeah.
Do you see that? I've always maintained that Utah will be the last state to legalize marijuana because of our religious influence. But do you see a point where marijuana is going to be legal nationwide?
Well, you get into personal, I guess it's a DOJ position. I don't see much good coming from legalized marijuana. I don't. And I have strong feelings about that here in Utah. I just don't think that is good public policy to somehow give the imprint of this is a good thing or an okay thing to young people to start. And I just think it leads to a lot more trouble in their lives, and it's going to bring down our society. We want young people to be focused on job, trades, skills, and getting education, as opposed to sitting in their basement and smoking marijuana all day.
I would back him up. A ton of people in the Odyssey program, they come in for things like heroin or meth addiction, but when you talk to them, it's, well, I started out when I was a kid smoking a lot of weed and drinking, and then one of my friends had meth or had an oxy or something, and I tried that, and then it progressed. And I'm not saying it's necessarily 100% a gateway drug, but almost every single person who has a more serious addiction in our program started smoking by smoking pot.
Yeah, Randall, I'm glad you said that. And it's interesting how you hesitated and tried to catch yourself and not going all the way, because I think the marijuana lobby is so strong and powerful that they intimidate us away from really speaking the truth. Because almost to every person, a victim of like this fentanyl case where we had a lot of death and destruction and tragedy in the wake of this fentanyl case, you talk to the parents who lost their children, their young adult children, and they will tell the same story that Randall just told. So you'll have this big fight, political fight about whether it's a gateway drug or not, but colloquially, talking to people, how did this happen? And they will start with the same story Randall said, and that marijuana starts this story of tragedy.
And what we've found on this show is that it is so easy to get pot at any high school,
Yeah.
and I'm talking all the way east, west, north, south, Catholic schools, private schools, drugs are so accessible.
They are. And, it seems to me it shouldn't be that controversial when the Surgeon General of the United States, that seems like a pretty good source, right?
Yeah.
When the Surgeon General of the United States says, really bad idea for young adults to start with marijuana because their brains are not up for it and it's going to lead them down a track of addiction that is going to really become a ball and chain for their life.
I remember my mother saying, I don't want you to smoke pot. It could lead to something more serious, cigarettes. But
Well, it's the same with drinking. I mean,
Yeah.
I started when I was very young, and I became an alcoholic, and it was seeking a euphoric numbing or something. I can't even remember why I started it, but the same thing happens with pot. I mean, people sit around and get euphorically high, and then want to keep pursuing that euphoric high and do it through other means. I mean, and I don't think there's empirical proof that it's a gateway drug, but like as you said, colloquially, there's almost every single person in Odyssey, and that's like 800 people a day, say they smoked pot when they were younger. Did that turn them into a heroin addict? I mean, you can't prove that, but they did, but they all did. So
yeah, and those numbers are incredible. And this is something that is going to be a huge issue to deal with in this country because every year a couple more states
Right.
do legalize pot.
let me ask you to put a crystal ball on. What do you see in the future in terms of maybe 5-10 years from now, what the drug situation is going to be, or what will the laws have changed? Will there be more diversion programs? I mean, it's pretty hard to answer that, but what do you think for the future?
Americans are can-do people, and we're going to work together to try and solve these problems. We've seen some progress. When I started as U.S. Attorney about 5 years ago, I saw this opioid surge coming and the death rates of overdoses coming. And I held a series of media events to try and call out the community to what we were seeing in law enforcement and these overdose deaths and these tragedies, to try and get other parts of the community to step up. Because I can't, with my police officer friends, arrest our way out of this.
No, you
I
can't.
can't.
We'd have to build millions of jails.
Right,
and you'd have
right.
To,
There's no one answer. It's going to really take a community response, and we've seen that. I mean, you see the billboards, you see television stations and public service announcements, you see the medical community, you see the treatment community really focusing on it. And the lieutenant governor announced within the last year or so that we see that overdose death rates with opioids flattening, if not decreasing, just a little bit. Well, that's positive news.
Sure.
So we've made some ground. We've made some headway on that. And to be more aware, the drug take-back days, these drugs that are sitting in your cupboard because
Sure.
you didn't have to take them all, right, when you get your knee replacement.
But I'll save them just in case
Save
I
them.
have
Well,
pain.
then if you have a susceptible teen in your family who has, had some struggles, and they know that that's in there, it's going to really be a problem for them. So there's a lot more awareness and effort. And so I am an optimist, Randall. I think 5 to 10 years from now, we can be in a better place. There's not one answer. There's a lot of answers. And a lot of them are Band-Aids and bandages to a deep wound in our society with this addiction crisis.
But deep wounds take a long time to heal.
But we still have to apply some pressure to it, right? We
Right.
still have to apply pressure while we figure out what's causing that wound. And, I think there's a lot of work to be done there. Frankly, I think, and this is where Utah can make a difference with some of our culture of families and the strength of the family in the home. I really think that's where a lot of this starts. Because a lot of these other stories that we hear are people who didn't have strong parents or, good programs after school.
Or their parents used.
Or their parents were users, and it's a cycle. Yeah. So if we can, in the long term, so if you're asking a long-term question, the long-term answer to me is strengthening the family in the home and giving them more support and resources to avoid this. And you see slivers of that with the tobacco and alcohol campaigns. We see these ads and campaigns about talking to your children about alcohol so that when they make that choice, they're better informed. That's a sliver of what I'm talking about, that I think we can strengthen our home, empower parents and other guardians and adults in people's lives so that next generation is better equipped to handle this.
Well, something to finish on a little optimistic.
Well, no, I totally agree with them because this is a problem that's built up over the years, and it was building for so many years before the media or anyone else said, hey, we got a real problem here. And then all of a sudden, people start coming together, as he said. I mean, you have Utah naloxone. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we don't have as many overdose deaths. And Jennifer Plum, who started that, just came, she came out of nowhere and started that, and then naloxone kits are in all the first responders' cars now. And I mean, it's just, you're right. Treatment centers. I mean, we've expanded because the need has been so great.
And this diversion court
Yeah,
is an offshoot
that's
of
another
that.
one.
So there are a lot of good things happening.
But they don't happen overnight, And
But-
so I agree with it.
We appreciate everything that you've done. Thank you so much. We want to give the phone number out one more time because you do it so well.
80. I'm glad you asked me that. I've seen it's like I could play an announcer on a game show. I'm glad you asked me that. It's 801-322-3222.
And our guest this week, U.S. Attorney John Huber. Thank you so
Most
much for coming.
important guest we've ever had. Thank you very much
Thanks,
for
Randall.
coming by.
Is there going to be a dress code in the future? I dressed up a little bit today, Randall.
I didn't. So he puts us all to shame. But you look good, John.
He does. Want to thank Lee, who's done everything to make this podcast and TV show happen. Bill Francis at Comcast, thank you so much, Bill. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.